Okay, guys, I'm doing my best Santa Claus impression based on this cute picture because I love me a retro Santa Claus. But I'm so excited about what I learned over the last 24 hours. I just had to jump on and share this with you as we approach the Christmas holiday because it's a really fascinating American story. I'm sure you know the poem, "Twas the Night Before Christmas." I bet some of you can recite some of it. It's one of the most famous poems in the entire world. And it is an American poem written by an American. We just don't know which one. So let me tell you a little bit about this. I was holding this because I wanted, we all have a very similar image of Santa Claus. One of the reasons why we do is because this poem was so popular that in a lot of ways it standardized Santa for us all to imagine together. And it's been that way for, more than 100 years, almost 200 years now. So let me take you back to 1823. 1823 is 40 years before the Civil War. America is fresh out of the American Revolution. We are still finding our way as a country and figuring out our place in the world. There is a man by the name of Clement Moore. He's a scholar, an academic. He's from a prominent New York family. And he's the one often credited with writing this poem, although it took him years to come forward and claim it. So the story goes is that he was on his way home to see his 6 children. The driver of his sleigh happened to be a Dutchman. I've seen different accounts, whether this was just a driver, someone that worked with him. He actually lived in the Chelsea area of New York City, and he had a farm. He had a large area of land. He was kind of a wealthy guy. And apparently he was influenced by this conversation going home on Christmas Eve. This is in 1822. And the poem, and let me get you the exact title, Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, was published the following year. So that's what we know of Clement Moore. About 20 years after it was published, he published an anthology of his work, and so he included this poem in it. But it took him a long time to come forward and say he was the one that wrote it, which is why it's a little bit of a mystery. The poem was published in 1823 in an upstate newspaper in New York. It was published anonymously. And what's amazing is that we actually have the original paper online. This is it right here. So I can read it from the original paper. I have a link on the website if you want to check it out. And it's really cool to look through this original paper because there's a lot of advertisements and random stuff. You can see this poem was published on the 3rd page. And it's a letter from the editor to the children of the area saying, "We know not whom we are indebted for the following description." So it says, we don't know who gave us this poem, but it's amazing. And it captures the wonder of Christmas. And so we're going to publish it. Now, for many years, everyone thought that Clement Moore is the author. I mean, that's widely understood. People now still believe he's the author. If you go to the Library of Congress, they list him as the author. But the family of Henry Livingston, who is an upstate farmer, came forward about the turn of the century and said, "Our dad wrote that poem because we've heard that poem for years. In the early 1800s, we heard that poem. He recited it to us." Henry Livingston was not just a farmer. He had status. He was Dutch, and he was from a prominent colonial family. He actually was a veteran of the American Revolution, and he liked to write little poems, sort of whimsical poems, and he would publish them anonymously. And that's one of the reasons why people think that he may be the author of this poem, because this is a whimsical, playful poem. And many thought Clement Moore didn't come forward to claim the poem because he was a scholar and he didn't want people to think that he would write such a silly verse. That was the popular thinking. But Henry Livingston's family says, no, he wrote the poem. And there have been linguistic archaeologists that have tried to compare their works to figure out who exactly wrote this. Henry Livingston died 5 years after the poem was published, so he never claimed it, ever. He was closer in location to this upstate New York newspaper, but he never came forward, and his family didn't until years later. So it's very difficult to know what the truth is, and we don't know how the newspaper was able to get this poem. We have no way of understanding who submitted it. And so again, it's a little bit of a mystery about who did it. But the poem is powerful because of the verses that explain not only Santa, but its reindeer. Now, I've mentioned the Dutch piece in both stories, and there's a reason for that. We know Donner and Blitzen as part of the reindeer, but in the Dutch language, the original is Dunder. I'm gonna mess it up because I'm not Dutch. I don't. Okay, but anyways, it's like Dunder and Bliksem, thunder and lightning, and so it was changed into the German translation later. But both authors have a Dutch figure in their life, either because it was the roots of Henry Livingston, or there was a Dutchman that worked with Clement Moore. So that's been debated, who was using the Dutch language and for what reason. So I just thought this was a kind of an interesting story to tell you about a smarter Christmas, if you will. December 23rd, 1823, it was the night before Christmas was published, became one of the most famous poems in the world, and no one really knows exactly who wrote it. The one thing is clear, though, and I love this from the New York Historical Society, who in the 1860s had Clement Moore pen an original draft for them, and they still have it. They said, everybody thinks that Santa Claus is from the North Pole, but in reality, he's actually a New Yorker. Because whoever wrote about Santa Claus was in New York State. We just don't know who it is. So that's something fun. Check out the links I'll put on the website for you so you can check out this old newspaper if you'd like to. But just one of the great, amazing Christmas mysteries. There he is, jolly old Saint Nick and his 8 tiny reindeer. Merry Christmas to all, and to all, a good night.